Welcome to the deep dive. We always aim to, get past the surface level on complex topics, cut through the jargon, and deliver those core insights from often dense source material.
Yeah, get to the heart of it.
Exactly. And today we're really digging into a concept that's fundamental in religious thought. It's one that I think often gets boiled down way too simply.
Which one is that?
Biblical favor, or as most people probably know it today, grace.
Right. Yeah, huge topic. Carries enormous theological weight. And you're right, the simple definition like unmerited favor barely scratches the surface.
It really doesn't.
When you actually trace it back through the ancient texts, the sources we're looking at today, well, it reveals so much more.
What kind of sources are we talking about?
We've got a real stack here. Everything from the foundational Genesis narratives, the legal codes in Exodus and Leviticus, right through to the, I'd say, profound poetry of the Psalms.
Okay, so a wide range.
Definitely. And what they show collectively is that this divine favor, this grace, it's dynamic, it's active, it's often surprisingly costly, and it's fundamentally relational. It's not just an abstract idea.
That's a key point.
Yes.
And our source material, it spans centuries of storytelling and law and poetry. Doesn't just use that one modern word, grace.
No, not at all. That's more of a later, maybe New Testament consolidation, you could say.
So what are we tracking then?
We're tracking a whole network of related concepts. You see words like favor, obviously, but also kindness, compassion, and that really deep Hebrew term, often translated as unfailing love or steadfast love, cheesed.
Okay, we'll come back to that, I'm sure.
Oh, definitely. And it's interesting, even when you look at how scholars analyze these texts today, one source we glanced at actually tries to categorize favor into like 6 different types.
6 types? Like what?
Themes ranging from just sort of common kindness all the way up to what they call electing power or saving grace. It gets quite technical.
Right. Okay, so it is complex.
It is. And that complexity actually confirms our approach for this deep dive. Instead of getting bogged down in, say, those 6 specific academic categories,
I'm doing what?
we're aiming to distill the core function of favor as it actually plays out in the narrative itself. How does it work on the ground, in the stories?
Seeing it in action.
Exactly. And when you do that, we see about 4 key components cropping up again and again.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's this idea of unmerited election, someone being chosen, basically. Second, a powerful sense of covenantal loyalty sticking to a promise. Third, a system of costly mediation, like bridging a gap but at a price.
Okay.
And finally, it all seems to point back to God's intrinsic character, who God is. So by following the story, the narrative, we get the definition through the actions.
Got it. So if you, our listener, are looking to get past that quick, maybe Sunday school definition, and you want to grasp the historical context, the narrative weight, the deep theological dimensions of favor and grace,
And this is the deep dive for you.
stick with us. We're starting right at the very beginning, Genesis, where the need for this favor just sort of explodes onto the scene almost immediately. Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Genesis, the origin point. The sources, they set up this, well, it feels like a radical paradox almost instantly.
How so?
Creation starts perfect. Right? God saw all that he had made, and it was very good, complete, whole.
The ideal state.
But then, just chapters later, that perfect structure completely shatters. Humanity falls into deception, blame, and then very quickly, violence.
Yeah, the speed of the breakdown is, it's actually shocking when you read it straight through. After the first sin, the very next major story is Cain and Abel.
Right. Brother killing brother.
And even before the murder, the text gives us this crucial insight, this psychological snapshot. When Cain is resentful, feeling rejected, God warns him.
What's the warning?
It's incredibly vivid. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.
Wow. Crouching at the door like an animal waiting to pounce.
Exactly. And that little phrase, it establishes the ongoing condition of humanity right from the start. There's this inherent, powerful, persistent pull towards messing up, towards moral failure.
So that failure is the baseline. It's not an exception.
According to this narrative, yes. Failure is the baseline, the natural inclination.
Okay, but if the baseline is universal corruption, if sin is crouching at everyone's door, then how does the story even continue? How can God maintain any kind of relationship with a species that's fundamentally flawed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It seems to require something else. An intervention. A distinction needs to be made. An act of sovereign choice.
And the first really massive example of this is Noah.
Yes, Noah. The context is critical. The world had just completely spiraled. The text says the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. Not just a little bad, utterly depraved.
So bad that the decision is made for essentially a reset, a flood, universal judgment.
Universal and, according to the text, deserved judgment. It was the consequence of that pervasive corruption.
But then we get that crucial little word, but.
That but changes everything. Genesis 6, verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Just like that. A simple statement.
Simple, but revolutionary in the context. Noah isn't saved because the world suddenly got better, or because he himself had achieved some kind of absolute perfection that no one else could.
He was described as righteous and blameless among the people of his time, but the favor seems separate from that description almost.
Well, his character is noted, definitely. Righteous, blameless, walked faithfully with God. That's important context for why God might choose to show favor to him. But the favor itself, the selection out of the judgment, that's presented as God's initiative. He was selected in the midst of universal judgment. It wasn't that his goodness earned salvation for the whole world. Rather, his connection with God allowed him to receive this unmerited election.
Unmerited election. Okay.
Yeah.
It seems like that favor then defines his whole destiny, right? It's not just a get out of jail free card. It's more like a re-entry ticket into blessing.
That's a great way to put it. Absolutely. The favor delivers him from the judgment, yes, but it also becomes the means of blessing into the future. After the flood, what's the first thing God says to Noah and his family?
Be fruitful and increase. The original creation command almost.
Exactly. It's a reaffirmation of purpose. Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. So the favor leads directly to the restoration of life, the continuation of the human story, the possibility of relationship. It shows the distinction wasn't arbitrary. It was for a purpose.
Okay. So Noah is exhibit A for unmerited election, saving from judgment. We see that pattern continue almost immediately, don't we? With Abram, who becomes Abraham.
Yes. And Abram's story adds another layer. His story isn't defined by his perfection either, far from it. It's defined initially by his belief.
How so?
The Lord makes these huge promises to him, descendants as numerous as the stars, land, things that seemed impossible. Abram's old, his wife Sarai is barren.
Logically impossible?
Right. But Abram believes the Lord. And the text states, crucially, that this belief was credited to him as righteousness.
Credited as righteousness. So it's like a status conferred on him.
Exactly. It's an act of favor that precedes performance. He's declared righteous, in right standing, based on his faith in the promise, not based on some great moral deed he had already accomplished.
What's so fascinating, though, is how the narrative immediately turns around and shows his flaws. It reinforces that this righteous status isn't about his personal perfection.
You're talking about Egypt.
Yeah, the incident with Pharaoh. He's scared, so he tells Sarai to pretend she's his sister. He basically puts her at risk to save his own skin.
It's a clear moral lapse. It's deception driven by fear, by self-preservation. Not exactly righteous behavior in the conventional sense.
Not at all. Yeah, what happens?
Well, because the covenantal favor rests on Abram, God intervenes. But not to punish Abram. He intervenes to protect Abram and the promise tied to Sarai. God inflicts serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household.
So Pharaoh gets punished for something Abram initiated through deception.
That's what the text says. And it gets even more striking. Abram isn't just protected, he actually benefits materially from the deception. Pharaoh, trying to appease whatever divine power is causing the plagues, gives Abram sheep, cattle, donkeys, servants. He leaves Egypt wealthier than he arrived.
Wow. That's profound, like you said. Divine protection and even provision seem to override his human error, his deception.
It underscores that the promise, the covenant, is more robust than the individual's immediate failings. God's commitment is the anchor.
This feels like a really critical point for anyone listening, trying to understand grace. The source material seems to consistently emphasize that God's commitment is anchored in his promise, his character, not in the fluctuating reliability of the human partner.
Precisely stated. And this complexity, this pattern of flawed people receiving favor, it continues right down the line. Look at Jacob.
Oh, Jacob, the ultimate trickster. The name itself means he grasps the heel, or he deceives.
Right. And he lives up to it. We have that incredibly painful story of him deceiving his blind, elderly father Isaac to steal the blessing intended for his brother Esau.
It's premeditated, manipulative. Esau's reaction is heartbreaking. He cries out, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing."
It's raw betrayal, yet what does God do? He continues to pursue Jacob. He meets him at Bethel, reaffirms the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac to Jacob, the deceiver.
So the blessing, even though obtained through deceit, seems to stick. And God's commitment continues.
It does. And then years later, decades later, Jacob is preparing to reunite with Esau. He's terrified, understandably so. He fears Esau's vengeance.
What does he do?
He sends waves of gifts ahead. He splits his family into 2 groups, and he prays this desperate prayer. But significantly, he instructs his messengers to tell Esau that he hopes to find favor in your eyes.
He uses that same word, favor.
Yes. It's this narrative acknowledgement, isn't it? That favor, that undeserved kindness, isn't just needed vertically between humans and God. It's also desperately needed horizontally to navigate and heal broken human relationships, especially those broken by our own actions.
So the whole Genesis narrative, really, from Noah to Jacob, seems to hinge on this idea. Divine choice, divine favor, precedes and sustains the relationship, consistently overriding this pattern of human error and failure.
That seems to be the foundational message. Favor isn't an afterthought. It's the starting point and the sustaining power.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. The narrative shifts gears dramatically. We move from these stories of individuals, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, receiving favor, sometimes despite themselves, to the formation of an entire nation. The Exodus story. This feels like favor on a massive, almost unprecedented scale.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
The Exodus is arguably the grandest display of divine favor in the entire Old Testament narrative. It's the moment when that covenantal remembrance we talked about ignites a mass deliverance.
How did that remembrance factor in?
The Israelites are slaves in Egypt, brutally oppressed. Their cries for help rise up. And the text explicitly states why God decides to act. It says, He heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob.
So it wasn't because they suddenly became perfectly righteous or mounted a successful rebellion?
No. The trigger wasn't their merit. It was God's memory of a promise made centuries earlier, a unilateral promise. That act of remembering, that loyalty to His own past commitment, is the engine driving the whole deliverance. They didn't earn freedom. They were granted it based on God's faithfulness to His covenant with their ancestors.
And the deliverance itself isn't just about walking out free. It culminates in this incredible, almost unbelievable moment of unearned material wealth.
Right, the plundering of the Egyptians. It stated that the Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people.
Favorably disposed.
Yeah.
After all the plagues.
Seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But the text says God moved the Egyptians' hearts. So when the Israelites asked for articles of silver, gold, and clothing, the Egyptians just gave it to them. They left Egypt laden with the wealth of their former masters.
That's staggering. It's material provision granted solely through divine intervention. Unearned.
It is. It underlines the totality of the favor shown.
Yeah.
Deliverance from bondage and provision for the future.
So here we have maybe the peak expression of pure, unmerited favor. Mass deliverance, unearned wealth, all rooted in covenantal memory. But then they get through the Red Sea, they're out in the wilderness, they arrive at Mount Sinai, and everything seems to change.
The mood shift is palpable.
We go abruptly from this overwhelming display of favor to the giving of the law, the 10 Commandments, and then pages and pages of detailed statutes and ordinances. It introduces this profound tension, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It introduces the necessary counterpoint to favor, which is justice and responsibility. The law, starting with the 10 Commandments, lays down the non-negotiable standards for what it means to live in a relationship with this holy God who just rescued them.
So favor initiates the relationship.
Yes. And the law defines the terms of maintaining that relationship. It also outlines the severe consequences for violating those terms. While favor got them out of Egypt, the law tells them how to live with God now that they are out.
But if the ultimate goal is relationship, based on favor and forgiveness, why make the law so impossibly detailed, so demanding? Why does it seem to require such a high, specific price for every single transgression? It feels almost designed for failure.
That's the core tension, isn't it? It's a deep theological problem the texts grapple with. The answer seems to be that divine favor, true grace, cannot simply ignore justice. If it did, then moral distinctions would be meaningless. Right and wrong wouldn't matter. Holiness wouldn't matter.
So there has to be accountability.
There has to be accountability. Therefore, forgiveness, the restoration after failure, needs to be channeled through some mechanism that acknowledges the breach. A mechanism of satisfaction or payment or atonement. The complex sacrificial system detailed in Leviticus is that mechanism.
Let's focus on the detail of that cost, because it's really specific. It's not just saying sorry.
Not at all. Look at the requirements for a guilt offering, for instance. Say someone sins by lying about or stealing property from a neighbor.
Okay.
They can't just bring a ram to the priest and be done with it. First, the law demands they must make full restitution, give back the stolen item or its value.
Right, makes sense.
But then they have to add a fifth, 20% of its value on top of that, as a penalty, as mandatory restitution for the harm done.
Wow.
Only then, after making the neighbor whole plus some, do they bring the prescribed ram to the priest for the guilt offering, for atonement with God.
So favor, operating through this system, is designed to address both the vertical offense against God and the horizontal offense against the neighbor.
Exactly. It ensures that holiness is upheld, the offense against God is atoned for, and that relational repair within the community happens. The debt is paid, plus interest. Favor isn't cheap. It operates through a costly process that satisfies both justice and mercy.
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't see the law as the opposite of favor. Perhaps it's more like the required structure or conduit through which favor operates in a world where sin is real and justice matters.
That's a much better way to frame it. The law provides the framework where the cost of sin is acknowledged and dealt with, allowing favor to flow without compromising righteousness.
And is there a central symbol of this meeting place?
Absolutely. It's the atonement cover, the kapparah in Hebrew, the solid gold lid placed on top of the Ark of the Testimony, the Ark of the Covenant.
What was inside the ark?
The tablets of the law, the very commands that Israel kept breaking, the evidence of their failure.
Okay, and the atonement cover.
On the Day of Atonement, the high priest would enter the most holy place and sprinkle the blood of the sacrificed goat onto and in front of this atonement cover. The blood, representing the life given in substitution, the payment made.
And placed directly over the broken law.
Precisely. It's the ultimate symbol of mercy covering judgment, of justice and mercy meeting at that specific point. Favor is enacted, grace is given, but only after the demands of justice, symbolized by the law within the ark, have been symbolically satisfied by the blood on the cover. It's costly mediation made visible.
And yet, despite the overwhelming miracle of the Exodus, the awe of Sinai, the clarity of the law, the provision for forgiveness, the people fail almost instantly.
It's almost tragically predictable, isn't it? The golden calf incident. It happens while Moses is still up on the mountain receiving the instructions.
Incredible.
The people get impatient, they get scared, they revert to what they know, maybe from Egypt. They pressure Aaron, and they make this idol, this golden calf, and God's reaction is fierce. He sees them as stiff-necked people, quick to turn away.
And he threatens to destroy them, right? Start over with Moses.
Yes, his righteous anger flares. Leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation.
But Moses steps in. He mediates. And crucially, how does he argue? Does he say, oh, they're really sorry, give them another chance?
No. He doesn't appeal to their merit at all. He knows they don't have any in this situation. He appeals purely to God's past promises and God's reputation.
How so?
He says, basically, remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel. Remember the oath you swore to them. And he asks God to overlook the stubbornness of this people, their wickedness and their sin. He even brings up what the Egyptians might say, that God brought them out just to kill them.
So he's arguing entirely on the grounds of covenantal loyalty and God's own character and reputation, not the people's deservingness.
Exactly. Moses essentially forces the issue. God's commitment to his own past promises, his own name, must override the immediate, deserved judgment based on the people's present spectacular failure.
And that dynamic tension, God's unwavering commitment versus persistent human failure, seems to run through the entire story we're tracing.
It really does. The law sets the perfect standard, highlighting the failure. But the covenantal favor, rooted in God's character, provides the persistent path back.
You know, thinking about this tension, the perfect standard versus our inability to meet it, that's not just an ancient story, is it? Feels like it perfectly mirrors the internal conflict many people feel today. Trying to live up to high moral ideals, but constantly falling short. That stiff-necked description feels uncomfortably relevant.
I think you're right. It resonates because it captures a fundamental aspect of the human condition that these texts are exploring.
Okay, let's move forward in the narrative. We're getting into the historical books now, the time of the monarchy.
Yeah.
And we see this idea of covenantal favor solidifying, especially around King David.
Yes, the establishment of the monarchy, and particularly the Davidic covenant, is another major development in how favor operates. This is, again, a moment of purely sovereign selection by God.
He wasn't from a royal line or anything.
Not at all. God tells the prophet Samuel to go to Jesse's family in Bethlehem. He rejects all the older, seemingly more impressive sons, and he chooses David, the youngest, who's out tending the sheep.
From shepherd to king.
Exactly. And the Lord makes this unilateral promise to David. It's foundational. He says, I took you from the pasture. I will make your name great. I will provide a place for my people Israel. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me.
Wow. An unconditional promise of an everlasting dynasty.
It's presented as a sovereign act of favor. It's not initially dependent on David's subsequent actions, good or bad, though his actions certainly have consequences later. But the establishment of his line, the promise itself, is God's initiative. It's favor bestowed upon him and through him for the sake of the nation.
But this raises that tricky question again about justice versus inherited favor. If David receives this perpetual promise, what happens generations later when one of his descendants is just terrible, a really wicked king? Does that ancestral favor just erase their individual accountability?
That's a really sharp question, and it's one the sources themselves grapple with. It puts the concepts in tension. We see a clear example, a test case almost, in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 8. It talks about King Jehoram of Judah.
And what was he like?
Awful. The text is blunt. He did evil in the eyes of sickeningly evil ways of King Ahab's family because he had married Ahab's daughter. By all the standards of justice laid out back at Sinai, he deserved judgment. His reign should have been cut short, the kingdom perhaps thrown into chaos.
But that didn't happen.
No, he wasn't destroyed, and the reason given is explicit. The text says, nevertheless, for the sake of his servant David, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah.
For the sake of David. So the covenant made with the ancestor generations before
Acted like a persistent shield, a historical buffer. It didn't mean Jehoram escaped personal consequences entirely, but it meant the line, the kingdom of Judah itself, was preserved because of the original promise to David. It shows how incredibly strong and enduring that covenantal favor was considered to be. It could transcend even the immediate, blatant wickedness of an individual king.
Okay, so the Davidic covenant provides this large-scale historical framework for how favor persists over generations. But then there's a story within David's own life that feels like the perfect personal analogy for what this favor looks like up close. Radical kindness.
Ah, you must mean Mephibosheth.
Exactly. Mephibosheth. Tell us that story.
It's found in those powerful, moving illustrations of grace, of cheese and action in the Old Testament. David is now securely on the throne. Saul, his predecessor and sometime enemy, is long dead. And David asks this question, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Jonathan was Saul's son, but also David's dearest friend with whom he'd made a covenant.
So he's looking for someone from his defeated rival's family to show kindness to. That seems unusual in ancient power politics.
Highly unusual. Normally, a new king would eliminate any potential rivals from the old dynasty. But David wants to show kindness, cheesed specifically because of his promise to Jonathan.
And they find someone.
They find Mephibosheth. He's Jonathan's son, Saul's grandson.
Let's pause on Mephibosheth's status here. What's his condition?
He's vulnerable on multiple levels. First, he's from the overthrown house of Saul, so politically, he's a potential threat, or at least perceived as such. Second, he's physically disabled. He's lame in both feet, the text says, from an accident when he was a child fleeing after Saul's death.
So he's politically precarious and physically limited, and likely terrified when summoned by the new king.
Absolutely terrified. He clearly expects the worst. When he comes before David, he bows down, prostrates himself, and listen to how he describes himself. David asks, "Are you Mephibosheth?" And he replies, "At your service." Then David tells him not to be afraid, that he's going to show him kindness. Mephibosheth's reaction.
What does he say?
He bows down again and asks, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?"
A dead dog. That's about the lowest possible self-assessment, isn't it? Utterly worthless, contemptible, someone with no rights, no claim to life, let alone kindness.
Precisely. He sees himself as having absolutely zero standing before the king.
And David's response completely ignores that self-assessment. It's based entirely on something external to Mephibosheth himself.
Completely. David doesn't say, well, maybe you're not so bad. He says, don't be afraid, for I will surely show you kindness cheesed for the sake of your father Jonathan. The basis is the past promise, the covenant with Jonathan.
And what does that kindness look like in practice?
It's twofold and astonishing. First, I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul. All the confiscated royal property is given back to him. Material restoration.
Wow.
And second, you will always eat at my table, like one of the king's own sons. Perpetual access, provision, honor, and fellowship.
So a man who saw himself as a dead dog is instantly elevated to the status of royalty, essentially, given back his inheritance and a permanent place of honor.
Yes. And it's all unmerited by him. It flows entirely from the king's commitment to a promise made to the man's father. That act restoring status, providing unearned sustenance, based purely on a past covenant commitment, ignoring the recipient's perceived worthlessness or disability, that is the deep, personal picture of favor, of grace that this story paints.
It's incredibly powerful. That relational depth, the personal restoration, feels like the heart of it.
It really does.
And this pattern, this theme of favor leading to restoration, it doesn't end there. It extends even beyond the monarchy into the period after the exile.
That's right. After generations of disobedience, judgment finally came. Jerusalem was destroyed, the people carried off to Babylon, decades later when a remnant is allowed to return.
How do they interpret that return? Do they see it as, okay, we've paid our dues, served our time?
Not according to the texts like Ezra and Nehemiah. They don't frame it as a reward for their suffering or a payment earned. They see the return itself as yet another act of unmerited divine favor.
How is that expressed?
When Ezra recounts their journey back and their ability to start rebuilding the temple and the city walls, he attributes their strength and success directly to the gracious hand of our God was on us. It's seen as divine enabling.
And even the political maneuvering needed getting permission from the powerful Persian kings who ruled over them, that's also framed in terms of favor.
Explicitly. In Ezra chapter 9, Ezra prays this prayer of confession, acknowledging the people's past sins and their current status. He says, we are slaves now. They are still subjects of Persia. But, he continues, in our bondage, God has not deserted us. He has shown us kindness, cheesed in the sight of the kings of Persia. He has granted us new life to rebuild the house of our God and repair its ruins.
So even the political goodwill of foreign emperors, which allowed them to return and gave them relief, is interpreted as God actively showing favor, showing kindness, providing a new start, even while they technically remain subjects.
Exactly. It's favor operating on the geopolitical stage, creating the possibility of restoration when, by rights, they could have just remained scattered and assimilated. It's another iteration of that persistent, undeserved kindness driving the narrative forward.
Okay, so we've tracked favor through the historical narrative. We've seen it as unmerited election with Noah, as covenant loyalty sustaining flawed patriarchs like Abraham and Jacob, and even flawed kings through the promise to David. We saw it mediated through the costly system of the law and atonement at Sinai. We saw its personal face in the story of Mephibosheth.
A clear thread running through.
Now we need to shift focus slightly. We move to the Psalms. And here it feels like the writers are trying to get behind the actions of favor and to find the source. What does all this relentless, persistent kindness actually tell us about the fundamental character of God himself?
That's exactly right. The Psalms, in many ways, provide the theological bedrock, the why behind what we see in the narratives. They aim to define the intrinsic nature of the one who shows this favor.
And is there a key term here, like we mentioned earlier?
Yes, cheesed. We have to come back to it. This Hebrew word is absolutely foundational. It's often translated as unfailing love or steadfast love or loving kindness, sometimes mercy or covenant loyalty. None of those quite capture the full weight on their own.
Why is it so hard to translate?
Because it bundles together several ideas. It's not just emotion, not just affection. It implies action, commitment, reliability, loyalty, goodness, kindness, all wrapped up together, often specifically within the context of a covenant relationship. It's love that acts reliably based on a commitment.
Okay, so cheese is like the operational definition of God's relational character that makes all these acts of favor possible in the first place.
That's a great way to put it. It's the engine of favor. And Psalm 86, verse 15, gives us this incredible, concise summary. It defines God directly. He is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love, cheesed, and faithfulness.
Compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in cheesed and faithfulness. That sounds like a summary of everything we've seen.
It really is. It captures the essence. The default setting, if you will, of the divine character is presented as being oriented towards favor, patience, forgiveness, and absolute reliability, faithfulness.
And because this character, this cheesed, is understood to be constant, unchanging, the psalmists seem to use that as the sole basis for their hope, especially when they're in deep trouble.
Absolutely. That's the power and the realism of the Psalms. The worshiper is often in dire straits, sick, betrayed, persecuted, feeling abandoned. They rarely plead based on their own goodness. They don't say, look how righteous I've been, therefore you owe me rescue.
What do they plead based on?
Based entirely on God's character, on his cheesed. You see it over and over. Psalm 143. Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love cheesed, for I have put my trust in you. Or Psalm 31. Save me in your unfailing love cheesed. The expectation of rescue, the plea for help, is anchored not in the fluctuating merit of the speaker, but in the eternal, committed, loving character of God himself.
And that reliability gets hammered home through repetition, doesn't it? Especially in certain psalms.
Oh, definitely. Think of Psalm 136. Every single verse, all 26 of them, ends with the exact same refrain. His love cheesed endures forever.
Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good.
His love endures forever.
Who alone does great wonders.
His love endures forever.
Who, by his understanding, made the heavens.
His love endures forever. It goes on, recounting creation, the Exodus, deliverance, each act attributed to this enduring cheesed.
That repetition must be intentional. What's the effect?
It's like a liturgical hammer, driving home the point. It's meant to imprint this absolute certainty of God's reliable, covenantal love onto the heart and mind of the worshiper in the community. It becomes a narrative guarantee. No matter what happens, no matter how much we fail, this characteristic of God remains constant. His cheesed endures.
And this enduring love is precisely what allows God to overcome those inevitable cycles of human failure that we saw cataloged throughout the historical books.
Exactly. Psalm 106 is a great example. It's practically a chronicle of Israel's rebellion in the wilderness and beyond. Forgetting God's miracles, grumbling, making idols, intermarrying with forbidden nations, sacrificing their children. It's a grim list.
A real stiff-necked people resume.
Precisely. But after recounting all this failure and the resulting judgment and distress, what happens when the people finally cry out in their misery?
What does the psalm say?
It says, God took note of their distress when he heard their cry. For their sake, he remembered his covenant. There's that memory again. And out of his great love, cheesed, he relented.
He relented. So favor, the cheesed, acts as the mechanism for relenting, for pulling back deserved punishment.
That's how it's presented. The covenantal commitment, fueled by his intrinsic loving kindness, becomes the reason he doesn't utterly destroy them despite their repeated provocations. It's the force that allows for mercy even after judgment has begun.
There's also this fascinating contrast in some psalms, like Psalm 18, between God's immense power and his intimate care.
Yes, Psalm 18 is stunning. The psalmist describes God intervening like a cosmic warrior. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. Smoke, fire, earthquakes, thunder. It's overwhelming majesty and power.
Almost terrifying power.
Right. But then, in the midst of describing this universe-shaking theophany, the psalmist says something incredibly personal. He attributes his success and greatness to God's gentle help. You provide a broad path for my feet so that my ankles do not give way. You stoop down to make me great.
You stoop down to make me great. That juxtaposition is incredible. The God who parts the heavens also stoops down.
It highlights this profound paradox within divine favor. The infinitely powerful, majestic, holy God chooses to engage in intimate, personal, saving, exalting care for the individual worshiper. The favor isn't just a distant, abstract policy. It's presented as close, personal, transforming intervention. God condescends, and the old sense of the word comes down to our level to lift us up.
Now, one final point on this. All this talk of favor, kindness, relenting, might sound like God is just permissive, like favor means he just overlooks everything. But the wisdom literature, like Proverbs, adds a crucial dimension, doesn't it?
Absolutely crucial. It prevents a misunderstanding of grace as mere indulgence. Proverbs especially emphasizes that divine favor includes discipline.
Oh, so.
Proverbs 3, verse 12 states it clearly. Because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in.
So the discipline isn't a sign of rejection, but actually a sign of love, favor.
Exactly. The favor, the love, the delight, that's the motivation for the discipline. True favor wants the best for the beloved, which includes correction and guidance away from self-destructive paths. If God were indifferent, he'd just let people ruin themselves. The fact that he corrects, disciplines, trains, that's presented as evidence of his loving commitment, his favor. It's restorative, not just permissive. It shows that favor aims for growth and holiness, not just a free pass for ongoing foolishness.
Okay, that rounds out the picture. Favor isn't just about getting off the hook. It's about being brought into a relationship that includes transformation.
That seems to be the full scope presented in these texts. Hashtag outro.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear that biblical favor, or grace, is far more complex and active than a simple definition might suggest. It's woven right into the fabric of the entire narrative. History, law, poetry, wisdom.
It really dictates the interactions across that whole spectrum.
And we've distilled, 4 key components that kept showing up?
I think 4 covers the core functions we saw. First, there was that unmerited election, with Noah, God choosing someone, initiating favor despite the surrounding corruption.
Right.
Then second,
covenantal loyalty. This was huge. God sticking to his promises, particularly to Abraham and David, even when the human partners and their descendants failed repeatedly. That loyalty sustained the relationship.
Okay, costly mediation. We saw this clearly at Sinai with the law and the sacrificial system, especially the atonement cover. Favor doesn't ignore justice. It finds a way to satisfy it, often through a costly, prescribed process, allowing mercy to flow.
And finally, it all points back to
God's intrinsic character. The songs especially drove this home. The reason for all this favor is rooted in who God is: compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in cheese. That steadfast, unfailing, covenantal love and faithfulness.
What's truly remarkable when you look at it all together is that relentless pattern. The people are described again and again as stiff-necked, prone to wander, quick to forget.
The failure is consistent.
Yet God's commitment, his cheese, persists. The law demanded perfection, setting a high bar, but the covenant itself seemed to guarantee provision for the inevitable failures.
And that persistence, that refusal to give up on the relationship despite constant provocation, that really is the radical conclusion that emerges from this whole body of source material.
We talked about that powerful human analogy, David and Mephibosheth.
Yeah, the kindness David showed to someone who called himself a dead dog. Restoring him completely, land status, place at the table based purely on an old promise David had made to Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan.
So here's the final thought we want to leave you, our listener, with. Something to really chew on from this deep dive.
Go for it.
If that act of kindness by King David towards a self-described dead dog serves as a human picture, the analogy for undeserved favor, then consider the immense, almost incomprehensible scale of the divine favor, the cheese described throughout these texts.
That tenacious, relentless, his love endures forever kind of love.
Exactly. Think about the infinite gap between the majestic, holy God depicted, the one who, as Psalm 18 says, parts the heavens and comes down in fire and smoke, and the consistently failing, stiff-necked people, the flawed individuals like Abraham, Jacob, David himself, and the nation as a whole, described throughout these same texts.
It's a vast chasm.
It is. And bridging that chasm, according to these sources, solely through a relentless covenantal love that repeatedly chooses to remember promises, to relent from deserved punishment, to restore and redeem despite ongoing failure. That seems to be the true, deep, comprehensive, and often costly meaning of favor, of grace, established to these ancient writings.
That's the profound message they leave us with. That stubborn, pursuing, restorative love is the heart of biblical grace.